It's towards the end of February right now, and we love getting out of the woods. In fact, we're just getting that first warm up. So getting those temperatures up in the 50s makes us really want to get out and start shed hunting. And we always wait till around March 1st, and this weekend's it for getting out there. I love getting out the woods because I like to explore. And that's been going back to since I was a little kid, whether I was exploring for deer, scouting for deer, or not. I just like to explore the woods. I love being outside, and I assume you guys do too. It's why we're doing what we do. Not only do we get to hunt and pursue these great animals and all the strategy that goes along with it, especially mature bucks. I love that strategy angle and that portion of it, but we get to be outside. And it's, depending on how stressful your job, it's almost a necessity. But that being said, we're out there, we're seeing where deer are at right now, and we're seeing a lot of sign. I had a client trip over the last week, 7 clients in 8 days in Michigan. Dylan had a pile of clients over the last week. Seems like, Dylan, you've been on more client days than not over the last month.
This time of year, it's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to take off for turkey season, so I'm stacking them in right now.
Turkey season and summer. You like fishing time during the summer too.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Walleyes are coming.
So he jams the clients in right now, where I try to space mine out like a trip a month. 8 clients a month, somewhere around there. But bottom line is, we're seeing a lot of clients. We're seeing a lot of sign. We're seeing properties that don't have sign. The sign you see right now can be extremely misleading. And I want you to understand why you might see sign right now in locations. And just because you're not seeing sign in other locations doesn't mean it's a bad place to hunt. So if you're looking for sign right now and you're looking at it as, well, I just want to know where deer are at during the winter, well, then this is a good gauge. But if you're looking at deer sign right now, the end of February, and saying, I'm going to take this sign and I'm going to develop a strategy to hunt in the fall, you could be very misled, and I'm going to explain why. First of all, thermal cover. It's all about conserving energy. A lot of times we see a deer in conifer right now. It could be a red cedar thicket, white cedar thicket, stands of pine, and all that conifer, hemlock, in areas out in Pennsylvania where we hunt out there in public land, a lot of hemlock. UP of Michigan, where I used to be, a lot of pine and hemlock stands on low islands out in the swamp area. And deer would congregate in some of these areas because there's a couple things. For one, is thermal protection. Blocks down in the wind. Deer have to get out of the wind. A lot of people think, well, they have to bed on that south-facing slope that's warm. Well, if it's 12 degrees and you're getting 25-mile-an-hour winds, those deer will not be there sitting in the sun. The amount of sun that they're receiving and soaking up does not offset the energy loss because of that wind slamming them in the face at 10, 12 degrees, 20 degrees, whatever that temperature. So there's an energy loss based on wind speed and temperature. When you get back in that thermal protection, it can knock down that wind completely. They can get behind a bank of switchgrass we have out here that's 40 feet wide, 100 feet wide, and huddle down next to it on the back side of that switchgrass and not feel any wind, even though it's very windy, because that switchgrass is blocking it, filtering it, and pushing it out over the top of that bedded deer. So deer will concentrate this thermal protection, and all those I just mentioned. For the most part, white cedar is a little bit of a food source. They can't live on it for months at a time. But most of those, red cedar, pine, spruce, hemlock, does not represent a food source. So when they're in those locations, they're purely there for thermal protection, storm protection for the most part. And maybe it's the only cover around. Well, then they'll be there. It's very misleading. You flip it around, look at food plots. If they're hitting a certain food plot right now, or a certain planting, a certain ag field, I'll go to places, for example, we have thousands of acres of alfalfa around here, and you go to other places where there's one 20-acre alfalfa field and all the deer are hitting it right now. Well, that's the only food source for miles in any direction. Or if that's all that's available on that farm next to thermal protection, they'll probably hit that alfalfa pretty hard, but that doesn't indicate that alfalfa is what you should be planting for hunting season or wintertime. And it's the same for cover. Just because they're in pine right now doesn't mean that's where they want to be in the fall. So you have to really look at that thermal. Why are they there? And a lot of times, what they need right now for cover is something completely different than they need in the fall. In the fall, they want high stem count regeneration. Think aspen regeneration, hardwood regeneration, woody shrub tips, briar choked areas, mix of low pine, briars, shrubs, hardwood regeneration, grasses, weeds, all mixed together. That's where those deer are at in the fall. Now, sometimes that's where they're at right now, but if they need to get out of the wind and they need that thermal protection. Deer will go a long ways to get it. In fact, UP of Michigan, areas across the entire upper Midwest, even upstate New York, deer have been known in the past to travel up to 50 miles to get to thermal protection. And that was common along the Lake Superior shorelines. They'd go all the way down to, say, Lake Michigan. And it was interesting. When they cut, late 1800s, 1900s, it is said that deer didn't need to migrate the 50 miles that they did before, that they cut that virgin white pine. They would go all the way down to the shore, Lake Michigan shore, 50 miles. They didn't need to do that after they cut and after there was clear cut and regeneration, because they had so much food that offset the energy loss associated with thermal protection that the thermal protection could have offered. So at that point, there's so much food, they didn't have to move. They just sat there and gorged themselves, and that was enough energy to keep them alive. So a lot of times they're leaving those hardwood federal lands because they're not cut, and it's all mature timber, so they have to leave there during the wintertime because there's not enough food. All those forbs and forages and greenery that's available the rest of the year is just not there. So when you see that thermal protection, those pines, ask yourself, is this a good place for deer in the fall, and why? And that's the first reason we have why this is a really bad time to scout. Now, when you're looking at rub sign, old scrapes, that is really indicative a lot of times of November, October time frame, even early December for second rut. So you can look at that, but try to decipher all those pellets on top of pellets in some of the conifer areas right now. And that could really, if you learn those two, then it can really help you towards hunting season and compared to right now. Second is food. They need energy. And so what we see out here, we see great clover use during the summer, although we only have 2 acres out of 18 acres planted. Great summer use. Great use of clover, pass through little hunting plots. Again, 2 acres out of 18. During October, November, and sometime in December it runs out. So it'll be super green, super lush, deer like it. That sometimes it's down to the dirt and it's not green anymore. Or it's eaten so much it appears it's not green, it's just dirt. Our brassicas, our full brassica blend, that's more of a mid to late season blend. They start hitting around here end of October, middle of October, especially with those tillage radishes. They eat that first. Then they're hitting our purple top turnips last. That's what they're hitting right now. The green blends, where it might have annual clover, peas, vetch, tillage radish, late planted buckwheat, a little bit of oats, a little bit of rye. They love that in the early season, and they'll hit that hard right now. Corn, they might not touch our corn around here on the property till December. I don't like that. In other areas, they'll grind it down, in Iowa or Ohio, areas where you can bait, you can actually brush hog the corn. Well, then the deer eat it instantly. It's not legal for us to do that here. So the only time we can do it is in this late winter, spring, when we're getting ready for spraying next month and we're going to be planting. We can get rid of our corn stalks, help them break down a little bit, but at the same time, we can take our sprayer through there and take care of the fields. They're hammering corn right now if you brush hog it, if it's laid down, if it's still standing in certain areas, especially if it's next to thermal protection. Brassicas, they're hammering our brassicas right now. They're shelling out all those purple top turnips. They're not touching the radish. Even within that brassica blend, you have to understand what's good for late, what's good for early. They're hardly touching our green areas that they prefer in late August, September, October, into early November. They're hardly touching that area. It's in the snow, it's that white side where there's not as many feeding circles. Then you get into the brassicas, a lot of feeding circles, and then it's hard to not find a deer track in the corn. They're hammering the corn. And then the clover, depending on if that's all that's available and it's next to thermal, again, it can be misleading. You look at this clover field and there's feeding circles everywhere. You look at this clover field and there's feeding circles nowhere. And it really depends on that thermal protection next door. Bottom line is, you look at where they're feeding right now, you could say, well, corn is what I should be planting for hunting season, when corn was the last they hit. Well, I just plant brassica because there's feeding circles everywhere out there. It looks like a bomb went off, but you don't realize that they're not touching the brassica till mid-season. Then you look at the early season stuff and you're saying, well, I don't want to plant that for hunting season again, but that was what they ate from August, September, October into November. The clover can be misleading too, depending on the time of the year. So bottom line is, a lot of times the food they're eating now is the opposite that they want in the fall. Don't just understand that, but understand why. And just like the thermal protection, why they might need that now versus another time, that's going to lead you to hints of what you should need. A lot of times it's the opposite of what you should be planting in the fall. And then herding tendencies. Why do they herd up right now? I don't look at it like, well, they're just extremely social creatures and that's this great time they want to be together. Now, you do see that with bucks. They're getting back into their bachelor groups. You do see that during wintertime, and they'll stay together in spring, summer, and then when the testosterone starts flowing, they start to break apart, get into the rut. But even then, sometimes they're around each other. You'll see buddies. But bottom line is, they're getting together right now because there's ever shrinking food sources and thermal protection and quality cover that's been unhunter pressured. So they're really herding up together because there simply isn't a lot of good cover and food to go around. And then when you add in the complexity of properties that are overhunted in October, November, December, you could relocate a deer herd just because it's hunted poorly. And if those deer find adequate thermal protection and winter food, they'll stay. What's all this mean? Take it for a grain of salt of where those deer are at right now. Understand why they're here right now. And then you need to ask the next question, does this translate to fall? And what you might find is it does not. And so really understand, you might even find areas right now where you can't even find a track, but it's full of rubs and scrapes. Historical sign. And that's what you should be scouting right now. Verify the sign you're seeing right now with a lot of rubs, indications of licking branches, and indications that, yeah, this looks like a good spot for the fall, and that makes sense why the rubs are there, the scrapes are there, and it might not be where you find that sign today when you're out in the woods, whether it's February, March, April, and then they get into the summer tendencies. Those fawning grounds are very territorial. You'll find does scattered in areas where they're traditional, territorial fawning grounds. They fight for that area. If there's a hierarchy associated with that fawning ground, and that's a different story altogether. And then those bucks and those mature buck groups, those bachelor groups of bucks in general, they're going to look for the best spring and summer food, and those bucks are willing to travel a couple miles for it. Those does are more homebodies. So each and every season, things are changing, and you need to be aware of that this time of the year when you're heading out to scout, shed hunt, enjoy the great weather we're having right now outdoors. And if you're trying to apply a heavy dose of scouting strategy this time of year and an indication of where to hunt, you might find that where you should be hunting is the opposite sometimes, often even, of where you're finding that great sign today. Everyone, thanks for watching to the end of the video. I really want you to check out whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, Pure Wildlife Blends. There's so much we have to offer you. You know, if you never buy anything from us or hire us to come to your land, that's okay. We're still going to be putting out all this free content to try to help you out. I want to put a smile on your face and want you to have a great hunt. But from our food plot seed blends, to books, to web classes, to hiring us, we have lots of stuff to offer on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com and Pure Wildlife Blends. Make sure you check it out. The links are in the description.